Hello viewers, Chief here. How many of us have ever gone to fill out a form or write something on a piece of paper and made a mistake and thought, oh no, that's no good, I'll screw it up, throw it in the bin and try again? Well, I was thinking to myself the other day, what would happen if you screwed up a piece of paper and then unfolded it? It looks a bit creased, a little bit damaged. What if we did it 10 times? What sort of state would the paper be in? Well, today I'm going to fold and screw up a piece of paper 10 times. Then I'm going to unfold it and examine it each time and see what happens after the 10th fold and what condition it's in. What I've done is I've just taken a normal sheet of A4 paper like this, just plain paper, and I've just put a black border around it just so we can see where the edges of the piece of paper are, or is. And I've also put a couple of dots on there, coloured dots, a red dot and a black dot, just for a bit of scale, just to see how they will be tracking after we fold it each time, what condition it's in, whether it's easily distinguishable, how much they fade or crease, or they don't. So let's get to it. Okay, this is the first fold of paper. Let's unfold it and see how we go. It's still very stiff like a piece of paper. It unfolds fairly easily. I've put a little rip in the edge, but that's an occupational hazard. We'll use that as our marker. It's still fairly distinguishable with the red and the black dots there. The paper's still in very stiff condition. There's a few folds on there. You can see by little ridges and little creases on there. Let's fold it a second time and see what happens. Okay, I've just folded it and unfolded it for a second time, and as you can see, the black and the red dots there are still fairly distinguishable. The border's starting to look a little bit more faded, but there's a lot more creases and folds and quite deep indentations in the piece of paper. Let's give it the third fold and see what happens. Okay, here was the third fold, and it took a little bit of time to unscrunch it this time round. The paper's starting to become a little bit more pliable, a bit like some paper hand towel if you have that at home. The edges are still fairly distinguishable, so is the black and red dot on there. But the paper is developing a lot of creases on there and a lot of folds and indentations. If I just rotate it slightly, you might be able to see all the creases there. And it is becoming a little bit softer. So let's give it a fourth fold and see how we go. Okay, that's 4 folds with this piece of paper, and it is becoming a lot easier to scrunch it up and unfold it. It's becoming very, very soft now. It's a bit like a facial tissue. Very soft, very thin material. I suppose it's all the creases and folds have probably somewhat affected the structural integrity of the surface area of the paper. You can still see the black border around the edge of the piece of paper, and the black and the red dots are still fairly distinguishable. Let's give it another fold and see how we go. Right, here we have the 5th fold of this piece of paper, and it is becoming a lot easier to fold and unfold. It is also sticking a lot because of the creases are becoming a bit deeper. This is very, very damaged, this piece of paper, the amount of folds and ridges in there. I don't know if we can see on the surface area of the red and the black dots there. There's a lot of creases on there. It looks like cracked paint on timber. And you can see all these little deep fissures in there. And the paper's starting to become a little bit weaker on the high points of the crease. A bit like the top of a mountain peak, where it's the high point, and I suppose that would be rubbing against the surface area of the other paper when it's folded like that. Let's give it a 6th fold and see what happens. Right, here we have fold number 6, and I think we've reached a critical point on this piece of paper where we're not really going to add a lot more creases and folds and fissures and ridges in the surface area there. We're just probably going to expand on the ones that we have there, make them a bit deeper, and probably put a bit more wear and tear on there, and probably get down to the internal fibres of the surface area of the paper itself. The black lines around the outskirts of the paper are still very easily distinguishable, so is the black dot and the red dot, but you can see that there's a lot more damage to the surface area of the paper, but it's still relatively intact, and so is that crease area, which is a surprise. Let's give it another fold, which is number 7, and see what happens after that. Right, here was fold number 7, and it is getting a little bit more difficult to unfold it because the paper's starting to stick. I don't know whether that's from a bit of heat from my hands or just the amount of creases. There's more purchase on the ridges, which should help it stick together. Yes, that black line's still fairly distinguishable around the edges of the paper. The black and the red dots are still very distinguishable. I think some of the ink's starting to fade when the creases, the high points of the creases I mentioned earlier are starting to rub against the ink there. The ink soaked through the paper, of course, also. But yes, it's very, very damaged now, but I think it's not going to really deteriorate too much more, maybe from around the edges. Let's give it fold number 8 and see what happens. Well, there we have fold number 8, and as you can see, the paper is definitely starting to lose its shape. The edges are still very distinguishable. I think that's going to be a feature that's going to stay with this piece of paper. Of course, the black and red dots are there, but as you can see, just on the little profile there, the side profile, there is so many little creases and ridges on there. It doesn't resemble a flat piece of paper anymore. I would say it looks more like a white hand towel or a beach towel with the surface area of it, with interlocking woven fibres, more so than a piece of paper. Let's try for fold 9 and see how it pulls up. Right, there we have fold number 9. And as you can see, it is very, very soft piece of paper now. It sort of resembles a very thin handkerchief or a woman's scarf, the way the texture of the paper is. You could probably still see these deep ridges and lines in there, but looking at it a little bit closer, we'll do a close-up after the next fold, it looks like you're looking down at the top of snow-covered mountain peaks like the Himalayas or the Andes or the Rocky Mountains. That's what it looks like to me. And the edges of the paper are really becoming difficult to unfold. They're sticking together, and that's why it's assumed this shape. Let's give it the 10th and final fold and see what happens. And here is fold number 10. As you can see, it's formed a quite tight little ball, and it's a little bit difficult, a bit stiff to unfold. I'm not going to pull on the edges too much because it'll certainly rip into 1,000 pieces. It gives that impression, and it looks extremely battle scarred. I'm surprised this tear on the side initially didn't open up, but you can see even from this distance away that there's little fibres on the edge of the tear there. That's probably from the fibres of the paper itself, its construction. They're starting to fray and become more pronounced, a bit like split ends on here if you have a close look at the ends of your hair, if you don't look after it too well. And there's a piece of paper after it's been folded and unfolded 10 times. Now, let's compare the shape to an original sheet of paper. I'll just pick the camera up here. And as you can see, it's lost a fair amount of size compared to the original unfolded sheet. So it's quite amazing how a few folds and ridges in that paper can reduce its length and width. I'll place it over the top of a pristine sheet and have a look for comparison. And it's lost, a couple of inches in length and probably about an inch in width. Let's see if we can get a bit close with the camera and see some of those indentations in the paper there. When I say camera, it's actually my mobile phone, and the pixels on here are not too good, but that's what these videos are all about. And as you can see, the ridges in the side profile of the paper, it's quite damaged, but I'm surprised it's not in a lot of pieces at this stage. But there you have it. That's what happens when you fold and unfold a standard piece of paper 10 times. Maybe another time down the track we can try for 15 or 20 or maybe 50 times, but I would guess that it probably wouldn't last too much further than 20 times. If you like this video, just leave some comments, and if you have any suggestions, leave them also, and thank you for watching.